Do you have a story to share with the world? Of course you do. We all have stories to share. An Anchor podcast allows you to share your interests in a way that connects to others all across the globe. If you have been considering starting your own podcast and don't know where to begin, Anchor makes it easy to record, edit, and publish with the click of a button. You can even add music. Whether it's crime dramas, self-improvement, paranormal adventures, or tips about parenting, you too can share your unique imprint on the world. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. You've got this. I believe in you. Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tools and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. I have Judy Kane here with me today. Judy is the founder of Aligned Consciousness, which she helps people identify and release beliefs that may be causing unhealthy patterns in their life or just keeping them stuck. And we're going to dive into her book today as well, Your Four Truths, How Beliefs Impact Your Life. So welcome, Judy. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
I am excited to be here. Thank you.
So I've talked about subconscious programming and reprogramming on my show often since I'm an EFT tapping and quantum healing hypnosis practitioner. But what are subconscious beliefs? How do you explain that when people ask you what those are?
They're your default system, basically. Those are the beliefs that you build until you're about 7 years old. They control about 95% of your behavior. And when you're not intentionally doing things, that's what's running the show.
Exactly. And I kind of call it autopilot. It's what's running in the background 90 to 95% of our day, right? And so, when we are talking about our subconscious mind, it's roughly 90 to 95%, where our conscious mind is working that 5 to 10% of the time. And so when we're diving into our subconscious patterns and our belief systems, we have to reset them from that standpoint in order to bring them forward to the conscious mind so that we can actually see them starting to take place in our life. So you talk a lot about limiting beliefs and, our belief patterns. So how can we identify when we have a limited belief? And, because many of us are going about our days not even recognizing that our subconscious mind is creating 95% of our reality.
Absolutely. And it's such a good question. The first thing I tell people is look for the patterns. One example of negative self-talk or procrastination does not mean you've got a subconscious belief holding you back. But if this is your norm, right? Mm-hmm. If you self-sabotage all the time or feel anxious about the same types of activities all the time, or find yourself in multiple non-supportive relationships, or those are good clues. If there's a pattern of these things in your life, then there's probably some subconscious beliefs contributing to the problem.
Absolutely. And so, recognizing those patterns are half the battle, right? It's like, okay, I've been attracting these, these partners in my life that seem to be the takers, and I'm give, or I'm attracting jobs where I don't get paid enough for my, for my skills or my abilities, or, there's so many areas that we could create these subconscious patterns. And I know for me, when I started to do this work, I started to look at my parents and say, okay, well, where are their patterns at? And where did I pick up on these patterns? So as we dive into how our childhood belief systems actually impact our lives, of course, we have to talk about our parents because they're the ones who kind of helped program these systems based off of their programming from their parents. And so, how do we work through those? How do we work through these childhood programs that, we didn't sign up for when we were 7, but now as adults, we got to work through them, right?
Right. Well, and originally they were designed to help us thrive wherever we landed, right? I mean, that's nature's way of making sure that, hopefully we get accepted by our tribe.
Exactly.
because it's not safe to be excluded when you're little, right?
Yeah.
So, that's kind of, if we came in with our own ideas, that might not work so well frequently, So yeah, you come in with what's going to keep you hopefully as safe as possible where you land. But then they don't, and some of the things you pick up don't serve you well even then, but definitely by the time you're an adult, if you've got conscious goals and you're working hard at them and it's not happening, you've probably brought along some beliefs that are not supporting that conscious goal.
Absolutely. So you talk about in your book, Your Four Truths, How Beliefs Impact Your Life. You talk about four major areas where our limited beliefs patterns can actually be created. So let's dive into those four areas and see, because I'm curious what these four areas are, because I know the areas that I have been kind of busting through my limited beliefs, but I'm curious to see what you've talked about in your book and how we can help some people here, today get through some of these patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was kind of based just on experiential, just my observations of clients I've seen over the years, that many of the things I've helped people with fall into four different categories. Mm-hmm. So that's how I organized the book, right? And the four truths are, if you believe these things, then your life is a lot more fulfilling, right? Less stressed, more what you want, less what you fear, that type of thing. Yeah. So the first one is safety. Knowing that you're safe is like really critical to being able to operate, the way you choose. And there's so many different aspects of being safe. You can come in, you can be in a family that thinks rock climbing at the age of 5 is perfectly okay. And you can also have parents that at 25 want to wrap you in bubble wrap. So there's a wide range of what's safe within a family structure. But you learn how to fear certain things. You don't take different risks. You can have fear of success, because maybe you think it's not going to be okay that you have to spend too much time with the business if it's successful, or maybe you have to be visible or heard, and maybe that's not safe based on your
fear of being seen is a big one for people.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't come in with a fear of failure, or none of us would be walking, right? Like little ones, they'll keep getting up until they're walking. Falling down doesn't seem to faze them, but somewhere between that and later, depending on who you're learning from, failure is like either a great lesson, let's tweak it and try it again, or something to be really ashamed of and avoid at all costs. So, there's that. There's, the fear of success. Like I said, you can find yourself self-sabotaging. Mm-hmm. And it might be money issues for the success, or, all sorts of things where the success is not worth it based on your belief system.
And it could be something that as early on in our childhood that maybe we failed, maybe in school, something in gym class or something in art class, and we appeared to have failed and we were ridiculed, or we, we didn't feel like we fit in or something along those lines. And then now we've carried that pattern on throughout our adult life. So it takes us back. When we fail, it takes us right back to whatever age that was, 5, 6, 7 years old, where you're like, oh, the subconscious mind is like, hey, remember when you felt that way, when you did that?
Yeah. Don't do that again.
Exactly. So that's where our childhood belief systems come into play. And many don't even realize that, 20s, 30s, 40, 50, however old you are, these patterns are playing out from the age 7 and before that. I mean, majority of them. And that's hard for people to rationalize.
It is. And a lot of times it shows up, and I still I've been working with myself real time since 2011. I haven't gotten to the bottom of my list yet, but all of a sudden you'll find yourself saying, well, that's just the way I am, or I've never been any good at fill in the blank, right? That's a limiting belief right there.
Yeah. And that could have been stemmed from a coach or a teacher or a parent or someone, when you were a young age, that said you can't accomplish that. And I remember that as a child, people would tell me, you can't do that. I had a priest tell me one time that women can't play sports. And boy, that lit a fire underneath me. And I went and I played sports. Played college ball, and I actually scored 1,000 points in my high school career. So
Wow.
it was like by him making that statement to me, boy, did that light a fire. Now, some people could take that as, you're probably right, and then they would have led their life differently. So I think sometimes when those things happen, it can motivate us, or it can actually kind of cripple us a little bit. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would bet that you had encouragement for your ability before the priest said that.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I was good. I was good.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, you already had some beliefs that what he was saying couldn't possibly be right, so that was just taking on a challenge at that point.
It was like, well, let me show you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's cool.
But yeah, so our sense of safety, what's another limiting belief? What's another area that we struggle in?
Self-esteem, feeling like we have value and feeling like other people value us.
Oh, yes.
That's really important. Both aspects of that. We need to be confident about ourselves and proud of ourselves. I've had clients that can't even say a sentence about, I'm proud of myself.
No.
I mean, they cannot say words. Yeah. And it's, based on things I've read, your own self-esteem is good. And you also want to have that esteem from other people, to know that you are perceived as providing value as well.
Yeah, it's like
and those all yeah. So those come from childhood as well, right? Of if you weren't didn't feel worthy, if you felt like people weren't going to love you if you didn't do certain things, or if you never did things right, if you were constantly criticized, or not even constantly, it could be just several instances that can put a belief in your head. But yeah, that self-worth is really important, to be valued for who you are, and to be confident that you've got skills and things to contribute, and deserve to be heard and seen.
Yeah. And I'll hear that a lot with my clients, is that, my mom was a perfectionist, or my dad, I could never do right in my dad's eyes, or, whatever. And so now they've carried that through their adult life, is that they feel like they can't step out of the comfort zone or step out of the box, because it's almost like they have to receive validation, whether their parents are still alive or not. They're still seeking validation from an external source, rather than finding that validation within themselves and finding that worthiness. And so how do people overcome that? I mean, that's a big one. I think that's a key, one is.
It's a huge one, right? And another clue is, if you can't have your boundaries, right? If your priorities are never as important as anybody else's, if your stuff gets to the bottom of the list all the time, and if you don't establish healthy boundaries for yourself and the things that you need to be doing that are important to you, that's a big clue. If people can't accept a compliment, right?
Ooh, that's a good one. I talked about this in a previous show, is how when I first started to work on myself, I could give compliments really easily, but I could not receive them. I would get uncomfortable, and that's a good one. If people recognize that they feel uncomfortable receiving a compliment, there's some sort of wound there that needs to be healed, or needs to have some attention drawn towards that.
Yeah. Or, wow, you did a good job. Oh, I was lucky. Or it was the team. Oh, and of course, if it's a team, if it's group effort, then the other people help. But is it only them?
True.
Yeah.
And so it's like that fine line of, I would feel like I was being conceited or overconfident when someone would say, good job, and I'd be like, okay, yeah, I know, I was awesome, where, in society, people would look at it that way, where then I would start to just kind of, dim my light a little bit when I would get compliments, or people would say to me, wow, people compliment you all the time. You're always perfect, blah, 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 so I would get that as a kid, well, teens, probably more teens. And so then I think I started to just kind of, slip into the shadow a little bit more, and that started to play out in my marriage. It played out in my work, and I wasn't standing in my full power. I wasn't feeling empowered like I was when I was, in my earlier life. So that's a huge one. That's a huge one.
It is a big one. Yeah. And it tends, I've seen it more frequently with women, depending on what you grow up with, with the expectations and the generations. There can be expectations that, well, the women are supposed to be taking care of the stuff, right?
Yeah.
The people, the family, the schedule, all those things. And even if you don't consciously believe it, if it's a societal belief that you grew up with, it's hard to escape it. It's true for any of the stereotypes.
It is. And being a former people pleaser here, I think I would put myself out there constantly wanting to make sure that everyone around me was happy, but I was never asking myself, was I happy? And 90% of the time I wasn't. I was miserable because I was overextending myself. I was depleting my battery, so to speak. And so I think when you were talking about setting healthy boundaries, that is huge when it comes to reestablishing your self-worth and your confidence. Because if you are a doormat and letting people walk over you, which I was for a while there, and it was like, I've got to get my power back. But then I would complain about the things that I would be walked upon, but I was like, this is my doing. This is my belief system that I need to change. And so, that you're hitting the nail on the head, with these are ones that I think I know I have personally been working through, and I know a lot of my clients are working through that lack of self-worth as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the third area that I've seen a lot in is knowing that you're lovable.
Oh, yes.
And it almost always is a good idea to check and make sure that you love yourself before you start looking at the beliefs about your relationships with others.
You're right. It's funny you say that, Judy. When I do EFT tapping, I have one where I say, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. And I have people that can't even say those words. They can't even say, I love myself. They start crying, they start coughing, they start anything to even get those words out. And it kind of floored me at first, because I thought this is kind of an easy thing to say, but I didn't really realize that this is a deep seated, limiting belief, is that people really cannot love themselves first. We talk about self-care and all of that, but it's like just really loving yourself and being blessed for who you are. And that's a tough one for people. And that was eye-opening for me.
Yeah, it is. And the consequence of that, it probably stems from conditional love when you were a child, right? Of, well, I need to be like this or do these things for these people to love me.
Yeah.
And so you pretend, or you become something that's not yourself out there in the world, because you don't think you could possibly be lovable the way you really are.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's so, I was always trying to please my mom. She was the one that was, dad was the good job, good job. And my mom was like, good job, but you could have done this. There was always a but. And so I started to recognize patterns in my life. I was attracting bosses, female bosses, that were treating me the same way. And I'm like, where is this pattern coming from? This went on for like 3 or 4 jobs. And I was like, all right, I'm attracting perfectionist female bosses that are holding me to this standard that was just unreasonable. And I never felt good enough. And I began to, when I started to learn the subconscious mind, I began to reprogram that. And then I noticed they started to shift. It started to change my external reality, because this was a belief system that I was holding on to, that I had to be perfect. And that led into OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and trying to fit in, trying to be perfect, trying to be the life of the party, all of these things played into that. And so, but getting down to the root of it, my mom was also feeling like she needed to be perfect, in her life. And so it was just a generational pattern that was being passed down. And I always say this, we can't blame our parents. We don't point fingers at them because they're going off the programming that they had. And then they're teaching us the programming, based on their best, ability at the time. And so but when you recognize those patterns, it's a game changer. You're like, whoa, my whole life can change.
Yeah, totally. So true. So, and then the fourth area is feeling like you're connected to something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
People feel isolated, disconnected, don't have empathy for others because they can't connect. They just don't see where the connections are and the commonalities.
Yeah, and that's tough. I think especially in the world, our nervous systems are so, bogged down, so inundated that it's tough. And I talked about this in my last show. I worked in healthcare and I'm highly empathic. I mean, I pick up on energies very easily, but I was so overwhelmed that I began to shut off. I began to become numb because I could not process the amount of empathy that I was dealing with, working in the hospital system with all the grief and the loss and everything I was dealing with. So I think it's like my cup, so to speak, it was like Niagara Falls. It was just overflowing to the, too much. And until I started to really dive into myself and be like, okay, setting boundaries, stop people pleasing, standing my ground in areas that I felt confident in doing that, where I knew that this was a belief that I needed to hold, and so once I started doing that, I began to become less overwhelmed and less stressed out. But I think, that empathy is kind of a fine line there because it's like you want to be, but then on the other hand, you're like, oh, I feel like my battery's getting drained. And that's where I was at. Yeah. For a long time.
Absolutely. And empaths have to be careful there's a difference between understanding how somebody else might feel in a certain situation and feeling it yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean,
it's that sympathy and empathy. Yeah.
Right.
There's a difference between the two. But yeah, that's huge. I mean, I feel like those four are very much so limited beliefs. And, I know one too, the finances, where those come into play, where people, that's a huge one. It's like, people are like, I mean, just me, you've got to work really hard to make money. That was one that I was ingrained since the day I was born. And my parents were ingrained with that. So now I'm still busting that belief system.
All the safety ones, the scarcity, the relationship with money, those all kind of for the most part, fall into that safety area. And it's so, you see so much, the scarcity, it's not just money. It's, maybe you don't think you have some other resource that you need, time or clients, but it's fear-based, right? And which is back to safety.
It is. And those emotions all have a vibrational frequency to them, where fear is that slower, drawn out, lower vibrational frequency. So that's why, you feel like, when you're, you can kind of tell when you're having fun in life because time is just flying by really fast. And then when you're may not be in alignment and things are kind of dragging, you're like, all right, I can definitely sense those times. I keep saying, now that I'm doing these podcasts and I'm, really feeling very aligned, I'm like, where did August go? Like, August is gone.
I was comparing it the other day to, if you're a passenger in your car and you're out on a country road with fences with fence posts. And if you look sideways and if you're going like 55 on a country road, you see the fence posts going like that. You can't even focus on them if you're looking straight at them. I mean, they just go zipping by. So that's kind of what time feels like to me some days.
I do too. But I know I'm happy. I'm feeling good. I'm enjoying all of my guests and all of the interactions I'm having with my clients. So it's like, okay, I'm feeling good and I'm in a good state, but time is going really, really fast. And so, so you do a lot with helping people break limited belief patterns in their businesses. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because I know when I first started my business, I left the corporate world, well, healthcare, and I started on my own, and that was terrifying. And my physical body started to show like I was restricted and I was hurting and and I know it was fear. I completely know it was your first one. It was safety. I was like, I don't have that income coming in anymore. I'm moving across the country. I just started my business. What am I doing? So talk about that a little bit and how, because I know there's a lot of people out there who want to take the leap and they want to do that, but what are some things that come up for people?
All right. So some of the, particularly if they're escaping corporate, some of the things I have seen often are a belief that they won't be able to make the same salary they made in corporate.
They won't have health insurance.
Yeah. They have a really hard time believing that they know what they're doing. Not that you can't have imposter syndrome in corporate, but when you go out on your own, a lot of the people I've worked with just don't feel qualified to charge what everybody else is charging. I've seen so some funny, just one-off types of beliefs. I worked with a guy who thought that a business wouldn't be sound if it didn't start slowly.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, and so his business was going extremely slowly until he changed that belief that it's okay. The business can be doing well and grow quickly, right? And that's okay. And I did something similar when I started my business. It was well, I know it's going to take a while for it to get going. Yeah. And so, of course, it took a while for it to get going because that's what I believed.
Yeah. And I guess I would be the same because at first I was like afraid had fear of being seen. It was like, I have this valuable information, but I'm afraid to put myself out there because it was different. I was working with the subconscious, and that was very different than where I came from in traditional healthcare, right? They don't talk about those types of things. So I was actually,
you should have seen my family. I came from IT management.
Oh, there you go.
And like, you're going to do what? My daughters are still like, who are you? And it's been, a while now, but yeah.
And that's where that programming comes in from your family and from people around you. And I felt that way too. It was just when you break out of that program, everyone around you is like, what are you doing? Or they start to drop off the radar, it's like, it's just very strange, but that's a good indication that you're taking the quantum leap that, I talk about timelines a lot when you're shifting timelines is because where the person that you were before when those people, related with you, you're different, right? Once you break those limited beliefs, you're like, I'm changing. See ya.
Pretty much. Yeah. But one of the things that was really interesting is I ended up moving states a year after I started my business. And it was probably one of the better things I could have done for my business because I didn't have to explain to people who had known me before what I was doing. I was meeting all new people.
Yeah, it's like a fresh start. Yes.
It was. Absolutely.
I felt the same way because I started my business and then I quit my job and I moved across the country. And it was like some of those people were in my life, but I was meeting new people. So I do think that helps. It really does because those old programs would come up when I was around those people and it made it a little bit harder to bust through them a little bit.
Those are some of the, speaking of that in childhood, the roles you have in the family, right? When families get back together, they fall back into those old roles, even if everybody's, 50 years old now.
Oh, true. It's so true. I just thought about that yesterday. I thought how funny it is when we go back to my parents' house. It's been a while since me and my sister have gone back, but how funny it is when you go back to see your childhood friends or your teachers or, and they say things that, that how they perceive you and remember you. And you're just like, I don't even remember that. I don't even remember that version of myself.
Right? Yeah. It's really interesting. But so let's see some other, those are some big ones, but mainly it's the, like, if you come from corporate, you frequently aren't expected to find the business, advertise the business, execute the business.
True.
I mean, that's what people starting their own business, all those roles are things they need to learn or dust off. And
Yeah.
so that's, yeah.
And I think
So a lot of people think that they aren't good with technology, or that they can't sell, or that sales is sleazy, or, they come in with a bunch of beliefs that don't serve them well for, offering good service and getting paid for that.
absolutely. And it's like, in the healthcare industry, it was very siloed. So it was like, you've got, this is your role. And then if you needed help, you'd reach out to this person. And, but for me, I was always one that would try to learn as much as possible. But I think in corporate too, you're so programmed. You clock in at a certain time. You eat lunch at a certain time. You clock out at a certain time. You're there for a certain amount of hours. So the subconscious, especially if you're doing that for 5 to 30 years, I mean, your subconscious mind is just, it's got it down packed. It's like, I get there at 9 o'clock, I clock in, and then I have lunch from 12 to 1, and then I clock out, and then I clock it, so it's just that repetitive programming. And sometimes that can be really hard to break. I know, for me, I wasn't like that as much, but my sister is, she's very much on schedule. And now with her working from home, because due to COVID, at first she was like, I don't know how to do this, because she was so routine into being there at a certain time and having a lunch break at a certain time. And so that was an adjustment. And I think a lot of people go through that when they leave the corporate environment.
Yeah. Yeah. They either work too much, or they don't know how to structure it so that they get the right amount of stuff done.
Absolutely. And so,
yeah.
What are some other areas that we may be holding limited beliefs in that you've maybe come across with some clients?
Well, I've done a fair amount of work with physical symptoms of stress, because the stress is caused by beliefs.
Yes.
So if you change the belief, the stress goes away, and then the symptoms can go away. And so then you don't have those things anymore. And I've been astounded at some of the mind body connection is real and is just awesome. And I had no concept of that before I went down this path.
Absolutely. And I think, one thing I've noticed with clients is, especially empaths, that we hold a lot of weight. We hold a lot of weight. And that is a limited belief, because we feel like we need protection. And I did that for a while. I started to put on all this weight. And it was because when I first started my business, because I was afraid to be seen. I was afraid to be ridiculed or criticized or told, I was crazy or, whatever. So I was just gaining all this weight. And a lot of it had to do with that fear. It was like, oh, I have this subconscious protection around me. And then in the physical, it was manifesting as physical weight. And
absolutely,
so I do feel that those limited beliefs around our health, they can really be stemmed back to emotions and emotional patterns that we hold on to as well.
Absolutely. Because the things that I don't change. The things that people change when I'm working with them. Those are beliefs, right? That are it's the stuff that they acquired. That's their view, and perception is reality, right? Whatever your belief set is, that is your world. It's just, that's the way it goes. But yeah, the physical symptoms are a couple of other things I've seen with weight, which are kind of interesting. One of them, particularly with empaths, but people who are carrying the weight of other people's stuff. Sometimes that'll show up with extra weight on the body. And another one that I think is just hilarious, but I've seen this with a few people, is you're waiting for it to be your time. It's the weight is waiting.
Yes. And you'll always be waiting. You'll always be waiting. Like, you're like, I'm waiting to finish school. I'm waiting to get this bonus. I'm waiting to, whatever it is. And then once that happens, it's the next thing. It's like, okay, what am I waiting for next? And yeah, it's just really delaying it. And that's, I talk a lot about that, how EFT tapping it's like you have a record player playing and then you get a skip on the record. Most people will just pick up the needle and continue to move it past the skip and continue to play the record. Well, that skip is going to come back at some point where, when we're working with the subconscious, we're actually removing the record and we're putting on a new one. We're like,
Yes.
we're done with that old record. We're not going to play that record with a skip, anymore. We're putting on a new one. So think, once you heal those aspects of the subconscious, and it's infinite how deep you can go into the subconscious. You're like, it's a belief, underlying a belief, and as you grow, you just begin to shed them like an onion, deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Sometimes I've even compared it to artichoke, because it's not even smooth, evenly distributed. I mean, it's like a leaf here and a leaf there. It's like sometimes it's so random, going around the circle until you get to the root of it. It's it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's like you're working, I've had that where a client, we're working on money. Okay. And then we get down to the belief of rejection, back when you were, 10 years old from your little Valentine and they rejected you. And now it's playing out in your finances, and so
absolutely,
it's so fun to see where the energy goes and how to get to the root of it. And I'm often flabbergasted by where the root of it is sometimes with my clients. I'm like, I would have never guessed that. I had one client where she could not let go of the weight. Or sugar cravings. She had sugar cravings all the time. And we got down to the root of it. And it was when she was like 4 or 5, she would go to the dentist and she would have anxiety. And then she would eat, they gave her sucker, they gave her some sugar. So she started to correlate at the age of 5. When I feel anxious, I have sugar. So now as an adult, when she would have anxiety or stress, she would immediately want M&Ms or Skittles or, something. So I was like, that's interesting that, that belief system went all the way back to age 5. And after we cleared that, it was like, she's like, I have no interest in eating those sweets anymore. And so it's so funny. Do you have that happen when you're working with clients? Like they come in for something specific and then by the time you're done, they don't even really remember why they even had that problem?
all the time. Yeah. Because I love to hear how life changes for people after we work together. Right. And most people they go on their way and they don't even remember, some things were big enough that they remember what it was like before. But a lot of times, it's like life seems normal now, and they don't even remember the thing. One of the funniest stories I heard was a woman who came to me for a phobia of bees.
Oh,
and phobias work. I love doing phobias because those are fast. They're usually simple sourced, so they're easy things to remedy, with people. But she had this horrible fear of bees, and we got rid of the phobia. And she noticed a lot of things. She was enjoying being outside. She was loving seeing the trees. But there were 2 things that just cracked me up when she talked about them. She said, she's got a 10-year-old granddaughter who'd visited her house many times. And after, she'd gotten rid of the bee thing, they'd been out playing in the yard and they were thirsty and she was going to make some lemonade. And she says, let's have it out on the deck. The granddaughter didn't even know they had a deck. They'd never been out there together.
Oh my gosh.
And the other thing is she's an avid golfer. And somehow in her past, she had read that bees are attracted to bright colors. So all of a sudden she started noticing all these golf shirts in her closet that she bought that were new, that were like pinks and yellows and greens. And she had just subconsciously never bought those before because she didn't want to attract the bees. And then now it's all this color in a closet that it was like, she didn't, I mean, it was a surprise to her when she noticed it, right?
That's fascinating. And you don't even really realize how much these phobias or fears are playing out in your life until you get rid of them. And then you're like, oh my gosh, like I can actually live my life now without this fear. I felt like that when I worked through my obsessive compulsive disorder. It was so stressful. And I know it would get exacerbated when I was anxious, because I was trying to create control out of chaos, in my life. And so there were things I just wouldn't do. I wouldn't leave the house sometimes. I wouldn't, there was just a lot of things that were taking control of me. And once I started clearing that, it was like, wow, like I have so many more things I can do on the weekends that I couldn't do before because I was trapping myself inside out of all of these, kind of unrealistic fears that I was holding on to for all those years. But I
And
know
more
for me,
energy to do it, because all that fear takes so much energy to
it wipes
struggle
you
against.
out. It just
Yeah.
wipes you out. But it was funny, once I cleared it, then I went back and saw my mom and my grandmother, and I could see where I got it from. It was like, oh my gosh, this was passed down. This was, between the time I was born and age 7, I was in that theta state, observing,
Right.
watching mom and
Right.
grandma clean incessantly, or just do things repetitively, or, be perfectionists or whatever it was. And I thought that was how you were supposed to live my life,
Right.
I
Right.
picked it up. Mm-hmm.
That's what the children do.
Yes.
And I wish I'd known all this when mine were born.
I know it makes you look back and say, gosh, I could have been a different parent had I known all of this.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. It would have been nice to have known this. Yeah.
And you could kind of pick up on where their fears are too. I think but that's the beauty of all of this, working in the subconscious mind, is it's quantum, and we can heal. So it's like when we heal ourselves, we do heal those generational patterns, as well. So it's like moving forward, now we can, shift some of those patterns that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Generations back, generations forward, all of that.
Definitely. So Judy, if people want to reach out to you, how do they connect with you, and where can they find your book?
The book is in lots of places, all the normal places that sell books. It's an on-demand book, so it won't be sitting on a shelf somewhere. It could be ordered, at Barnes and Noble, or, definitely Amazon or small bookstores, any of those. If they go to my website, alignedconsciousness.com, there's one page there that's called book.
There you go.
Yeah, you can find it there. There's another, there are also pages there with some free resources and more information about subconscious. And I would, and if anybody has questions, they can always book a 15-minute free call with me. I'd love to answer questions that way.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Judy. I really enjoyed this conversation that we had today. And I always love talking about the subconscious mind. It's, there's so much that we can learn. And I do feel that this is such an untapped area, at least now in the world today. And we don't have to continue out these patterns in our life. We can shift them, and they can happen very quickly as well. Healing doesn't have
yes,
to take years.
Yeah. And it spreads, right? I mean, the more we change ourselves to get rid of those things, there's an impact on all of those around us.
There is, because when people see us shifting, they're like, wait, what are you doing? You seem different. And when I first started doing this work on myself, that was my first, recognition, was my friends were like, you're different. What's going on? And I'm like, yeah, I'm breaking through my limited belief patterns. And so, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And for all of you out there, check out Judy's website. I'll leave all the information below on the YouTube channel and on the podcast, so you can all reach out to her very easily and effortlessly. So thank you, Judy, for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I loved the conversation, and thank you for all that you're doing too, not just with your individual clients, but with the podcast where lots of people can hear.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You deserve to navigate your life as an empath in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.thesoulcafe.org.